On the morning of March 15, 44 BC, a group of Roman senators sprinted out of the theater of Pompey into the bustling city streets. They were covered in their leader's blood. They waved heavy iron daggers in the air, shouting that the tyrant was dead and the republic free. They expected citizens to weep with joy, to carry them on their shoulders as national heroes. Instead, as they ran through the massive stone forums, they were met with an absolute silence. The crowd just stared at them in total shock. 60 of Rome's most highly educated, wealthy politicians had just executed a meticulously planned assassination. But the public's reaction suggested a massive miscalculation. We are going to look at exactly how this single, violent act, designed entirely to save a democracy, ended up destroying it. To understand why these men butchered their own leader, you have to look at the rule the Roman Republic was built on. Founded 5 centuries earlier, the system relied on a blood-sworn oath. Rome would never be ruled by a king. Power had to be shared by elected officials, so no single man could dictate the law. Then came Gaius Julius Caesar. He had spent a decade conquering vast territories in Gaul, amassing immense wealth and an army that worshipped him. After crossing the Rubicon and crushing his rivals in a bloody civil war, he returned to Rome untouchable. He began accepting honors previously reserved only for dead deities. He sat on a solid gold throne and wore purple robes, and stamped his own face onto Roman silver coins. The Senate, largely out of terror, eventually declared him Dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. For the proud aristocratic senators, this concentration of power was intolerable. A politician named Cassius began organizing a conspiracy in the shadows, but he knew that if he led the charge, the public would view it as petty jealousy. He needed Marcus Brutus, a man respected for his moral integrity and a direct descendant of the men who had overthrown Rome's last king. To break Brutus's loyalty, Cassius launched a campaign of psychological warfare. In the dead of night, the conspirators threw forged letters through Brutus's window, making them look like pleas from citizens, begging him to remember his ancestors and act against the dictator. The pressure fractured his mind. Julius Caesar treated Brutus like a son, but Brutus convinced himself that his personal love for his friend was the necessary cost of preserving the Republic. On the morning of March 15th, the air was thick with rain and warnings. Caesar's wife had woken up from a nightmare about his bleeding statue, and a soothsayer had begged him to stay home. But Caesar's pride pushed him to ignore them, and he walked straight to the Senate. Because the Triennial Senate House had recently burned down, the meeting took place here, at the theater of Pompey. As Caesar sat down, the conspirators crowded around his chair with fake legal petitions. This maneuver was designed to separate him from his battle-hardened ally, Mark Antony. When the signal was given, the room dissolved into a claustrophobic, panicked frenzy. 60 men swarmed the 55-year-old dictator, wildly swinging hidden iron daggers. They were so frantic that they sliced each other's hands as Caesar fought back, throwing bodies onto the marble floor. Then, gasping for air and bleeding heavily, Caesar looked up. He saw Brutus stepping out of the crowd, raising his own dagger. Historical accounts say Caesar stopped fighting right then. He looked at his protege and whispered in Greek, "You too, my child?" He pulled his toga over his face and collapsed. The aristocratic conspirators had planned a symbolic liberation of the state, but they produced a frantic bloodbath that left the dictator with 23 stab wounds. The senators running through the streets found a city frozen in silence. They had spent months calculating the political mechanics of their move, but they had spent no time considering the daily lives of the citizens standing before them. This diagram shows the steep hierarchy of Roman society. While the tiny fraction of wealthy patricians at the top feared losing their political leverage, the massive population of struggling plebeians at the bottom lived a different reality. To them, Caesar was the man who canceled their debts, distributed free grain, and gave land to the poor. Caesar bypassed the traditional Senate checks to funnel wealth directly to the lower classes, securing their absolute loyalty in return. This created 2 versions of Rome. What the wealthy elite called tyranny, the working class experienced as the first real prosperity they had ever known. Days later, at Caesar's public funeral, Mark Antony delivered a strategic masterpiece. he stepped up to the podium and avoided making any direct attack on the men who had murdered his friend. Instead, he simply read Caesar's final will out loud. The document revealed that Caesar had left his private gardens to the city as a public park, and a sum of cash to every single Roman citizen. It was physical proof of Caesar's loyalty to the people over the Senate. As the crowd processed this, Antony reached down. He hoisted Caesar's ripped, blood-soaked toga onto the end of a spear, holding it high for the assembly to see exactly what the Senate had done to their benefactor. Antony successfully redirected the crowd's stunned confusion toward the men who had just removed their primary source of financial security. The Roman mob immediately rioted. They tore up benches from the markets, built a spontaneous funeral pyre in the city center, and grabbed torches to hunt the liberators out of the city. The violence in the Forum triggered a decade of militarized civil war that effectively dismantled what remained of the Republic's governing institutions. From the ashes of that bloody conflict, Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, crushed his remaining enemies. He returned to Rome, took the title of Augustus, and assumed absolute power over the state. Brutus and his co-conspirators held the closest friend to stop one man from ruling Rome. That act was the exact catalyst that guaranteed the 500-year-old democracy would be permanently replaced by a dictatorial empire.